Hey everyone, Dr. JC here again. Today we're going to talk about vitamin D and how one of its functions is to really impact our immune system. Also how our genetics play a significant role in how all this works in our bodies. A little bit of background information. It was Alexander Fleming who originally discovered antibiotics. He also discovered something else known as AMPs, which stands for antimicrobial peptides. And it's these AMPs that kind of acts as our first line of defense against potential infections, things like, bacteria, viruses. As long as human beings have been around, we've been bombarded by bacteria, viruses, things like the coronavirus and so forth. And it's vitamin D that's responsible for activating those AMPs to allow our immune system to fend off these potential infections. So let's talk about vitamin D. So vitamin D is made in our skin through sun exposure. So when we're outside in the sun, it will allow our skin to produce vitamin D. We can also get vitamin D through supplements, and we can also get vitamin D through our diet. So it's the sun and it's the diet that gets vitamin D into our system. Once it gets to our liver, it will then be metabolized and converted into its active form. And so when that happens, vitamin D will then travel and transport through our bloodstream to our cells. When it gets to the cells, vitamin D needs to bind to our cell receptor, our vitamin D cell receptor, which is right here. So it goes from the liver to the cell receptor, which allows vitamin D to get into the cell and to then activate these AMPs like we talked about to allow our immune system to function the way it's supposed to. When it works the way it's supposed to, great. However, there are three genes that are responsible for this process. So let's talk about that. When vitamin D is made in the skin or taken through a supplement, the liver will then metabolize and produce the active form of vitamin D. The production of vitamin D relies on a gene known as the CYP2R1 gene, okay? Then vitamin D is transported through the circulatory system to the cells, and that transportation relies on another gene known as the VDBP gene, which is vitamin D binding protein. Think of it like a bus taking the vitamin D throughout. It's a transportation system through our circulatory system. So then once vitamin D is transported in that bus to the cell, it is then dropped off and it will then bind to the cell receptor. So it opens the door and gets into the cell. So it has to have the right key to get into the lock, okay? So it gets off the bus, goes to the front door, unlocks the door, gets into the cell. Once it gets into the cell, that binding relies on another gene, the VDR gene, the vitamin D receptor gene. So that allows the vitamin D to get into the cell and to activate. So three genes are responsible for this process. But here's the kicker. Not everyone has the best version of all three genes. Some of us have maybe one poor version, maybe two poor versions, maybe three suboptimal versions. In fact, I recently tested the genetics of the DNA of a patient and got her results back. Her DNA showed that she had a very superior gene for making vitamin D, for producing vitamin D. However, her ability to transport vitamin D to the cell was suboptimal, was poor. Instead of having a bus taking her vitamin D through her circulatory system, she had like a little Uber car that could only seat like 2 passengers. So then also her ability to get vitamin D into the cell was also poor. So her gene for unlocking that door, she didn't have a master key. She only had one key and it was kind of beat up, so she was not able to get her vitamin D into her cells. So her absorption of vitamin D was poor. Her transportation of vitamin D was poor, but she could make a lot of vitamin D. So with this particular patient, when we knew this, when we learned about her genetic makeup, we were able to make some biohacks. We were able to make some recommendations based on our findings. So instead of her taking 5,000 IUs of vitamin D in the morning like she was, we recommended she take 2,000 IUs in the morning, 2,000 IUs at lunch, and then another 1,000 or so IUs at around 3 p.m. This allows her vitamin D to be circulating throughout her body throughout the day, and it allows her cells to be bathing in more vitamin D to allow for more optimal function of her immune system and her overall system. So the bottom line is not everybody metabolizes vitamin D the same. Not everybody processes vitamin D the same way. Vitamin D is vital for immune system function. It's important for all of us to have our vitamin D levels checked, but it's also important for us to understand how our body processes vitamin D, how our genetics process this, because it's 3 steps. So it's a triangular system that needs to be working optimally. When we know that, we can make a little biohack, a little tweak, a little adjustment to help that individual get more vitamin D into their cells. So I hope this information is helpful, and I hope you find it interesting. I'm going to be doing another video soon on our genetics and how it impacts our cardiovascular system, and it's going to be some great information. So I'll see you guys all on the next video. Have a great day.